Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm coming at you with everything I read in July and August, and I read a lot, I think 24 books. I've been on such a reading roll recently. I've read a lot of literary fiction, a lot of new literary fiction. We've also got some YA and poetry and non-fiction and classics thrown in there as well. And we have 3 5-star reads in here that I totally fell in love with. So let's get into them. First up, we have Exit Management by Naomi Booth. This is one of Naomi Booth's earlier novels. It tells the story of Callum, who lives with an older dying man in a beautiful London apartment filled with priceless pieces of art. And it also follows Lauren, who works in human resources, as the two are pulled into this home and spiral toward a violent end. So there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on in here. These overarching themes of compassion and class and our right to die that really pull together different aspects of this book. Naomi Booth writes with such intrigue, a real sense of mystery and foreboding that really pulls you in. Ultimately, I did enjoy the writing and the themes much more than I enjoyed the characters. They kind of held me at arm's length from the book and stopped me really loving it. That being said, Naomi Booth did create a really great experience here, and I do think her new work will be even better. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next up, in July, I read Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. This is a new debut literary novel following a beloved English professor whose husband is under investigation for having inappropriate relationships with former students, as the professor develops an obsession of her own. Firstly, the prose and the structuring in here is incredibly assured. There is so much confidence and skill. This did not read to me like a debut basically at all. The central character in here is pretty fascinating, exploring the different relationships she has in different parts of her life and the different approaches she takes to them was really interesting. I found her to be quite well rounded on the whole, although sometimes she did slip into reading as a vehicle for Julia May Jonas to explore the themes that she wanted to explore, which is always a shame when you can see that happening. A lot of good stuff in here and certainly an engaging read, so in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, we have When Our Worlds Collided by Danielle Jawando. This is a new YA novel set in Manchester following 3 different teenagers from very different walks of life as they are unexpectedly thrown together when a black teenage boy is stabbed in a shopping centre. I liked a lot about this. I loved the 3 central characters. All of their voices were super strong. I found them to be really convincing. I actually listened to this one on audiobook, which I would highly recommend. There are 3 different voice actors for the 3 different main characters, and it really brings it to life. Obviously, the themes explored in here of deep-rooted and pervasive racism and prejudice are really tough. I thought they were handled pretty well, especially when it came to the characters struggling with their own feelings of disappointment and fury. That being said, this was a little bit on the nose sometimes with some of the points that Danielle Jawando wanted to make, and I did find it to be a little bit predictable plot-wise, but a really enjoyable read, and it definitely captures the voice of Black Manchester youth, so in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, we have A Tidy Ending by Joanna Cannon. This is Joanna Cannon's newest novel. It tells the story of a woman named Linda who is living a very normal, married, suburban life when she becomes obsessed with a glamorous woman named Rebecca who used to live in her home, and local murders begin. I am a massive Joanna Cannon fan, and as always, the vibe of this book is so on point. It's small town and mundane and cozy, but there's also this delicious layer of crime over the top, and it's so funny. Characters in here are quirky and fully realised. The prose is dry and witty, and it just made me smile. I do have to say that I didn't love this one quite as much as I loved The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. It didn't warm me in the same way and it does get quite odd. But I do think this is a great read. It is delightfully sinister, so in the end I gave it 4 stars. Next up we have Scale by Mina Gorgi. This is a new poetry collection from the indie publisher Carcanet Press. It is described as tracing life at its limits, the poems tracing scales of distance and time and temperature. I really enjoyed this collection. I don't know how else to describe it other than to say that I loved the scale of it. These poems focus on the extremes of the natural world, the vast to the miniature, insects to galaxies. This collection feels like an exploration, often dipping into the strange and the dark, with this overarching theme of ecological concern running throughout. I loved the imagery in here, especially the poems that were wintry and snowy. They really stood out to me. As always, some of the poems in here didn't do it for me quite as much as others, so in the end I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. This is a new literary novel following the story of a woman named Eve who, despite her monogamous and adoring relationship, posts some nudes online and starts a relationship with couple Olivia and Nathan. This book has been getting a lot of hype recently. It's about sex and what it reveals in us and all of the contradictions in our desire. It's quite a satisfying and pleasurable read, whilst also aiming to be unabashed and challenging. So I did appreciate aspects of this book. I found the writing to be quite good. I found it to be thought-provoking in places. However, I didn't love this as much as everyone else seemed to. I didn't really connect with the characters at all. They kind of could have been anyone to me. Ultimately, this just hasn't had that much of a lasting impression on me, so while it wasn't bad, in the end I gave it 2.5 stars. Next up we have Boulder by Eva Baltazar, translated by Julia Sanchez. This is a newly translated literary novel telling the story of 2 women who meet and fall in love on a merchant ship. They move together to Reykjavik, and 40-year-old Samsa decides that she wants to have a baby. Boulder, as she is nicknamed, finds herself dragged along on this journey that she finds to be thankless and alienating. So this book is stunning. I totally loved this. This is short and precise and pretty much perfect. The examination of Boulder in here, the examination of her feelings towards her wife and freedom, her feelings towards motherhood and how this evolves, it's totally fascinating and raw. The prose is stunning. There were so many moments that I had to go back and reread. The translation is to die for. This book made me stop and think. I was totally swept up and convinced by these characters and their complex feelings. 5 out of 5 stars. This is a little masterpiece. Next up we have Last Night by Myri McFarlane. This one tells the story of 30-something Eve and her 3 best friends from school. They are still as close as ever. Eve is still in love with Ed, and then one day their lives are changed forever and some secrets begin to reveal themselves. So I've recently been getting into reading contemporary women's fiction, romance novels, and I'd heard so many good things about Myri McFarlane. This was a lot sadder than I was expecting. This is a true and raw exploration of loss and grief that is definitely worth knowing. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Myri McFarlane is great at writing characters and relationships. There were a lot of messy things going on in here that I loved delving into. I didn't totally love the book, but I did really enjoy it, and I will definitely be reading more by Myri McFarlane in the future. So in the end, I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, we have Losing It by Sophia Smith-Gaylor. This is a non-fiction book by a successful journalist exposing a ton of sex myths and misinformation. This does what it says on the tin. It busts some myths myths and fills in some gaps that the school sex education system leaves us with. It explores the larger sexual picture of one's own body, one's own pleasure and consent. I thought this was good. Sophia Smith-Gaylor pulls on some of her own experiences to empower others, and there were some really great insights. It is quite a basic introduction to sex education, I would say. There were so many topics that weren't explored in here. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next up, I read The Night Interns by Austin Duffy. This is a new literary novel following 3 surgical interns working a night shift as they try to keep patients alive amongst uncertainty and fear. This book explores the bizarreness of healthcare, dysfunctional hierarchies, intense pressure, moral tensions. I really liked the structuring in here. It was very focused in, very close. This helped build a tense and almost suffocating atmosphere that really suited this environment, this alien place of hospital wards. That being said, I do feel like this book didn't quite achieve what it wanted to. For some reason, this book didn't quite have the effect on me that I'd hoped. The characters didn't really touch me at all. A lot of good ingredients, but for me, it didn't quite work. So in the end, I gave it 2.5 stars. Next up, we have Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. This is a poetry collection from the wonderful Mary Oliver, exploring relationships that she's had with different dogs that she has owned and come into contact with throughout her life. This is just pure joy. Mary Oliver writes the most simple but beautiful nature and animal poetry, and I totally love dogs, so this was a dream. There is so much love and laughter and heartbreak in here. It is really personal. There are lots of gorgeous little details. If you love dogs and you love poetry, then this is a no-brainer. In the end, I gave it 4.5 stars. Next up, I read The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. This is a contemporary romance novel telling the story of Tiffy, recently dumped by her cheating boyfriend and earning minimum wage in a publishing house, and Leon, a palliative care nurse who works night shifts caring for the terminally ill. Tiffy and Leon work completely opposite shifts and need a place to stay at completely opposite times, and so they end up sharing a flat, although they never meet. Beth O'Leary has become a new obsession of mine. I love her romance novels. I love her sweet, simple, well thought out storylines. I love her characters and how real and raw they feel. I love their endearing and often hilarious relationships. This book was a total joy. I loved the setup. I loved seeing the development of Tiffy and Leon's relationship. Firstly, through post-it notes that they leave around the flat, and then later when they actually meet. This was a delight, as expected, and in the end, I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Oh William by Elizabeth Strout. This is a literary novel currently shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It tells the story of Lucy Barton, a successful writer living in New York, as she tries to navigate the second half of her life and ends up reconnecting with her first husband. This was my first ever Elizabeth Strout novel, and I see the appeal. This is about love and loss and family secrets, all good stuff. The characterization in here was very good. The complex, decades-long partnership in here was pretty fascinating to read about. It is joyful and sorrowful and tender and really well handled. Lucy Barton's voice, though, is the shining star in here. It surpassed all the other elements for me by quite a mile. So in the end, I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next up, we have The Queen of Dirt Island by Donal Ryan. This is Donal Ryan's newest novel, set in Tipperary, Ireland, following 3 generations of women from the Aylward family who all live under one roof. This is the second 5-star read in this video, and oh my goodness, this book. I am such a Donal Ryan fan. He is one of the greatest living writers. I will die on that hill. Everything about his novels, and this one in particular, is so understated and perceptive and achingly beautiful. There is so much tenderness and human understanding in here. The characters feel totally real, and the prose is just to die for. He never disappoints. One of the best things I've read all year. Of course, I gave this one 5 stars. Next up, I read I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. This is a new YA novel telling the story of 2 girls rivaling one another for valedictorian when 1 month before graduation, one girl kisses the other and then disappears. I had really high expectations for this one because of all the amazing things I'd heard about Casey McQuiston, and I did think this was good. I enjoyed the writing, a lot of the dialogue was really on point. I really enjoyed the setup and the teenageness and the queerness of it all. But unfortunately, the plot just let me down in the second half. I didn't stay engaged. I do see potential in Casey McQuiston though, and I will definitely be reading Red, White and Royal Blue at some point. I think that one will be more my thing. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I read Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is a modern classic telling the story of the figure Orlando. This spans 3 centuries, with Orlando living in different times and different genders, ultimately ending up in the 1920s. I love Virginia Woolf. I think she is a total genius. This was my least favourite novel by her so far, although that isn't to say that this isn't great. The concept here is awesome. I loved all of the observations about class and gender. I just love how she plays around with basically everything in her craft in such interesting and experimental ways. There were sections in here that I enjoyed much more than others. I particularly enjoyed the sections at the beginning when Orlando was young. Always thought-provoking, always inspiring. In the end, I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, I read Wow by Bill Manhire. This is a contemporary poetry collection opening with the voice of an extinct bird and taking us through time into the present and into the future where there are other possible extinctions. While this collection does explore quite serious, dark, ecological themes, this collection is quite satirical and entertaining. Nature runs throughout this collection. The details and rhythm of nature come through really beautifully, which feels quite comforting. This is a lush collection. It has light and shade. It feels almost magical. I'd really recommend trying this one if you are a poetry fan. In the end, I gave it 4 stars. I need it.
I need it.
I'm sorry. Next up, I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I just prized this out of my husband's hands as he was reading it. This is a new literary novel simply telling the story of Sam and Sadie, 2 kids who meet in a children's hospital and go on to create games together over the next 30 years. Another favourite read of mine from the whole year. This is an absolute knockout. God, this book felt good to read. It is just the character-focused, relationship-focused, decade-spanning literary goodness that I just live for. The background of this book is a love letter to gaming, but really this book is a love letter to friendship and connection. This book is so well-rounded on basically every level. You grow to really love these characters. You go on such a journey with them, experiencing real highs and lows. The plotting and pacing in here is perfect. The writing is so accomplished. This is Gabrielle Zevin's like 7th book or something, and my God, has this woman honed her craft. This is a gem of a novel. I need everyone to read it. Of course, I gave it 5 stars.
Who needs lunch?
Enjoy. Next up, I read Tiamo by Hannah Ostrovic, translated by Martin Aitken. This is a popular Norwegian novel / memoir, newly translated into English. It tells the story of a woman married to an Italian man as he is diagnosed with terminal cancer. This is a very personal look at love and grief and loneliness. It is about how and for whom we live. It is extremely harrowing and tender. It is very short, which I think worked. I don't think it needed to be any longer. While this book did have quite an intense emotional effect on me in places, it didn't keep me that engaged all the way through. Some of the sections I found to be quite distancing, but it's definitely touching, definitely insightful. I can definitely see that Hannah Ostrovic can write. I get the sense perhaps that this was more of a personal project for her. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next up, I read The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. This is a new YA horror novel set during a secluded summer retreat that gender fluid Mars attends in search of answers when their twin sister horrifically dies. So, mixed feelings here. I liked the setup here. I liked Mars as a character. Their voice was pretty strong. There was a lot of witty dialogue. Mars's gender fluidity felt authentic and added an interesting dimension to the traditional American boarding school. The atmosphere was definitely one of the highlights in here. Ryan LaSala knows how to build a delicious, tense, toxic environment. However, I didn't think that the plot was very good in here. I thought it was actually pretty weak, especially towards the end. This got quite wishy-washy. I was left feeling quite unimpressed. And so in the end, I gave this one 2.5 stars. Next up, I read Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This is a collection of lyrical ballads by Wordsworth and Coleridge. Shockingly. So I had wildly differing experiences as I read through this collection. A couple of these poems I really loved. The majority of them I found to be so boring. Reading this collection has definitely confirmed for me that I'm far more of a Wordsworth fan than I am a Coleridge fan. My favourite poems in here by far were the ones in which Wordsworth was exploring nature and aging. In the end, I just went somewhere in the middle and gave this 3 stars. Closing in on the end now, next up we have Is This Love by C.E. Riley. This is a new literary novel narrated by our protagonist Jay in the days, weeks and months after their marriage collapses, and is also interspersed with their wife's diary entries through this time. This book is really good. It is a fascinating look at a marriage and a marriage collapse through the eyes of 2 different people, 2 naturally unreliable narrators. There is so much feeling and contradiction and messiness in here. It's really well written, it's really well thought through. I definitely bought everything in here. I did find it to be quite an uncomfortable and sometimes upsetting read, I guess because of my own personal experiences with divorce. This isn't fun, but it is authentic and wise and sometimes funny. So in the end, I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, we have A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. This is another new literary novel, this one telling the story of a psychopathic female food critic who is as obsessed with sex as she is food. She loves to have sex with and then eat her sexual partners. So I didn't enjoy this one basically at all. And actually more than anything, I just found this to be boring, which isn't what I thought I would be saying. I expected so much more of this to be about the murders and the sex and the food. I didn't care about the backstory in here basically at all. I didn't care about the character, but even the bits that were about the good stuff didn't really do it for me. It was just a bit much. It was a bit indulgent, a bit obvious. There were some nice moments in here and I totally see the idea, but I just don't think the execution was very good. So in the end, I gave this one 1.5 stars. And finally, the final book that I read this summer was Lizzie Blake's Best Mistake by Maisie Eddings. This is a new contemporary romance novel telling the story of Lizzie, who, due to her uncontrolled ADHD, has just lost another baking job. Lizzie breaks one of her cardinal rules when she sees Australian rake for the second night and then they find out that she is pregnant. This was a gloriously summer read to finish off on. I loved everything about this really. I loved our protagonist, Lizzy. I found her to be charming and quirky and flawed and hilarious. From my limited knowledge of ADHD, I found this to be quite well explored and very natural. All the characters were really good in here actually. The side characters were really well drawn and really rounded the whole thing out nicely. Rake was very sweet. I loved his and Lizzy's interactions. Also worth noting that I loved the baking theme throughout. I thought this was totally delightful. Big recommend if you want something light and fluffy. In the end, I gave this one 4.5 stars. So there we go. Those were all of the books that I read in July and August. It felt like a lot talking through them. I really hope you enjoyed hearing about these books. Please tell me if you've read any of them and tell me what you read at the end of summer. I really hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all having great weeks. I can't wait to chat to you about autumnal reads soon. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will hopefully see you in another video very soon. Bye.